on the parent as well. If a parent is exploiting a child, you have CPS and other organizations that are able to push consequences on that child. Why is the manager the only person that you can ever actually respond to? Second, on the COPO clarification, to being charitable to them because I don't think opening government understood it. The point that was being pushed is that the parent still, like under your model, the parent still has to push you into the business side anyway. The difference is they just push you and then they just hire out a manager for you anyway. What we're actually going to do, because we come first, sorry, CEO, is we're going to mechanize the actual good incentives that the parent has to do good things for the child. Look, what does this look like? I think you're still going to have a professional manager on our side. Why? One, professional managers actually have the contacts to get you auditions. Note that even if parents are part of the business industry, the show business industry anyway, they probably don't have the managerial rep in order to go into audition rooms anyway in order to get you, unless you are like Scarlett Johansson Nepo baby level, at which case this debate becomes really fucking marginal. So we think these are probably parents who are like low level showbiz. Maybe they've had a couple of like supporting roles in theatre or TV or whatever. They don't have all the contacts that are available to get you in. So what I think this high involvement looks like is at worst a co-managerial role where you are being a joint manager, looking after your child's finances, looking after that kind of stuff, but also looks like aiding you in your audition process, helping you read lines, helping you like support you in terms of pushing you when your manager brings up a role to be like, yes, you should go take this role. This is going to be good. All that. On the frame, one notice that most kids don't end up successful. This is because most actors and like people in showbiz don't end up successful because the showbiz industry is incredibly cutthroat because it is incredibly desirable and lots of people push them in, which means that most people are going to have a couple of roles at most. It is not going to make them break their life, but they are probably going to like just do this for a little while and then have to end up in another role. But two, notice that there is a high potential for profit because the show business industry is very illustrative and very lucrative. We are aware of like high profits of CEOs on our side of the house, which means you have a high degree of people who enter into this who think they can be the next hot shit, who think they are going to be able to get really rich on this. Then on the incentives, couple of things. One is your voice on your side holds less sway because of your life experiences. Because people view you as having lower life experience. They view what you say as having less agency and less importance. They view the adults are talking about what is best for the child, and the adults understand the industry and understand that they know how you're going to be able to make some money out of this. But two, you're not shown as being given a huge opportunity because notice the high potential for high profit. You are being shown as you are getting your first footsteps really early before lots of other actors in order to push you to the point where you're going to be able to make this money. But notice on the incentives and notice how this directly clashes with what opening up. Everybody in this has the incentive to fuck you over because everybody has the desire to string as much profit and as much money out of this possible, especially for managers, given that they view themselves as doing a lot of work for you and that you probably don't need wages anyway because you're not paying for a house right now, so they can farm more wages out of you. This is particularly important given that a manager who is paid is going to not want to, like, I think in terms of the well-being versus like dropping out when it like an role is harming you, I think given that they tell you commissions, this commission is only going to come after you've been paid. I think if you break your contract and then don't get paid because you opt out of this because this is too hard, managers are probably not going to want you to do that because then they don't get paid, which means managers still have an incentive to push you to continue with these roles even if they harm your well-being because on their side they don't get paid. Secondly, as well, on the incentive for better role, I think they're going to define better role as the role that is going to maximize the most amount of money for them. So even if this role is really hard for you, takes you out of school, takes you away from your friends for so long, they probably don't care because the role that matters to them most is the one that gets you most money. But notice that in terms of the like long-term commitment to your career, they only care about you insofar as you are making the money. If they view your career as not working out for them, they're probably going to drop you immediately because why are they going to care? On the comparative, parents can be shitty. We accept that. If your parents are shitty, you're probably screwed on either side of the house. But on our side of the house, when you at least have parents who are less shitty, they are like they have higher incentives to not be shitty. Why? One, they have a biological instinct to protect. Notice that you are their child, that they have probably brought you into the world, which means they care about your well-being on a more intrinsic and biological level, which means there's something below the rational money-making profit. Two, in terms of emotional proximity, they are with you 24/7, even outside of the showbiz world, which means they're able to greater see the impacts. But three, they care more more about you long term. Notice that when your career is over, your parents still care about you in your future career, whereas your manager no longer gives a fuck about you. On preventing hardship. One, they are less willing to be exploited when your parents are in the room. This is especially important given that, yes, parents can push back anyway, but when they see stuff and they know what's happening and they know the mechanisms because they're in the room with you, they are better able to push back on you when you're being exploited. This is particularly important given the impulses of emotional protection. Two, you're able to take the child more seriously and able to stand up for their fights because you trust and emotionally bond with the child because they were your child in order to be able to care about them and trust their emotional state. But three, they were able to put things into perspective and notice that because this industry is so cutthroat, you're not going to be successful. They're going to be able to put your well-being and happiness at the forefront rather than just pushing for greater and greater profits. CG.
Surely, besides incentives which can be proven to be symmetrically bad or good, the manager has a contract, visibility, legal effect, and a reputation to defend.
Okay. One, we've already showed you why the legal consequences are symmetric. Two, sure, they have a contract. But given what OG says is, under that contract, you're able to say, actually, no, I don't like this role. I'm being screwed over. But then why is the manager have any incentive to, tell you to drop out of that role anyway? Well, what that means is you don't get paid. Their contract to you is just, they are contracted to get you roles and get you money. But if you then opt out of that role or try to opt out of that role, they're going to push back against that because they don't want that. In terms of the coping, this is a second bit of response. One is the child is going to feel better emotionally protected when they don't feel like their parents are having empty words, when their parents are actually seeing how they're being fucked over and are seeing how they're able to stand and are able to recognize how parents are going to be able to stand up for them in the room. Notice on the comparative, your parents are not in the room and then don't understand fully what you're going through and just have to take your word for it and give you empty words. Because they are 24/7 accessible to you and listening, you're A, feel that they have the knowledge to provide you real comfort, but also B, feel like you're able to better action that and take a healthy attitude towards it because they are there to practically support you, proud to.
All right, I would like to thank the speaker for what was an excellent speech. And now I would like to invite the DPM to continue the case for their side. I'm not sure if you're still going to be streamed, but please let me know if you agree either way. And
yeah, I'm fine with being streamed. And POIs in the chat until 5 minutes and 30 seconds, and then you can do audible POIs after that. Yes. And also I'll be recording my speech on my phone, just the audio. If you want to give a POI but don't want to appear in the recording, just message me after and I'm happy to delete it. First of all, just some quick extraneous rebuttal on this point about parents, your kids being able to access the ability to sue their parents pretty much. I think this is extremely unlikely when I think it's a high burden to actually sue your parents because they're someone you not sue, but go to these agencies because they're someone who's you're now dependent on your career success, which is probably something you do care about. And second, they're also someone who is your parent, they're someone who's emotionally close to you, and therefore it probably feels very difficult to feel like you're emotionally backstabbing and betraying them by calling this number. This is just a really high burden for a kid to conceptualize them being physically abused or emotionally abused, and then having then the information and knowledge to then call a number. This needs to be proven why this is. When a kid has such buying and trust because this is their most dependent person, they are unlikely to do this. Therefore, yeah. Also, on this bit about how now managers are going to be the most exploitative people, I think they also need to tell me why parents are going to be able to stop this exploitation that they talk about. One, managers have a lot more information than parents. Just because a parent is in the room doesn't mean that they can know what is a good career move, what is a bad career move. A manager probably has a greater amount of knowledge about this. They probably deal with a lot of clients every day. They can probably, especially if they deal with parents, they can probably just say it in the way to appeal to the parents' interest and therefore do it. I think so therefore, yeah. that I think means that the manager still has like this ability. Other thing is contracts. I think contracts are like the contracts that will be signed are probably going to be looked at parents on both sides of the house. I think this just because like I don't think kids can sign contracts. I think parents have to be the ones to sign contracts. Therefore, if there is a really exploitative contract, it's very easy to deal with it. I also again just another bit of analysis about why like again there's also just the idea of like kids also have child labor laws, which is probably just easier to dealing with a manager rather than a parent, because of all the reasons they tell you that you have emotional bias to your parent, you're less likely to want to sue them. I think what we get on our side is, again, what's important is, one, a kid is less likely to access their parent for emotional support when this is something that is going wrong on set, because they see how much time their parents are looking into it. They see how much like they're doing all these things. They're getting annoyed when you're not doing well. I think what's important, why the parents are likely to resent the person, is because the parent has one client, and that is you. They're putting all their emotional energy, therefore they are going to push you. A manager has less need to push because for the main reason that they have multiple clients. Like, yes, it probably increases the likeliness that you'll be dropped, but it doesn't decrease the likeliness that you'll be overexerted by a parent, because a parent has one interest. I also will concede also, if we concede that crappy parents exist on both sides, which opening opposition concedes, I think just the fact that they now have control over your emotional time, your career, as well as everything out, as well as like monitoring you every single day, all that time, I think bad parents now just have greater access to emotionally abuse and psychologically harm you, because they have greater access to more fundamental things in your life. You have less ability to go to other people because they are controlling more of those elements. This again just means that any the kids who are going to be most likely to be exploited on their side, because their parents are already slightly implicitly pushing them at home, is now extenuated even more, and therefore this is even a greater harm in their side of the house. This then means that these kids probably just have worse lives and like more psychological damage. Because I think what's really important is the mutual exclusivity of both sides. Is on our side of the house, we guarantee that there is at least some form of emotional support from a parent who is less biased, because they're spending less time doing this. This is why you should weigh it so highly, because there's other ways you can get access to managers and talent and career advice. There is only one place you can truly get like a parent who is going to be able to look after you and like have those needs. When they have those conflict of interest, it just means that there is the times where a parent will come in and be, I'm going to emotionally help you and support you. They always have to have in the back of their mind that they might be throwing away 20, 30 hours of their week that they're spending on you, which is something that a parent is unlikely to want to do. This again decreases the likelihood a parent will be that emotionally supporting figure. Also, I just think again, I think like the other thing of like, oh, but now people will exploit you on set by doing like pushing you extra hard. I think just intuitively, I think again, one there's a lot of people on these sets, when they see kids being exploited, they're likely to want to report it, because people have an incentive to care about kids. If a kid is like crying, a person would likely to want to support it. I think getting support on set is probably not mutually exclusive. I think people know that if something is going wrong on set, they are likely to just want to contact the parents immediately, because this is something that's going to happen on both sides of the house. I think they need to tell me like a place where managers have a high amount of ability to exploit that isn't on both sides of the house, and a high amount of where kids are completely unprotected. I also again think when the parent only has access to your home life, they're just way more likely to care about it. I'll take CG or CO, sorry.
So I think I understand how horrible it can be if a bad parent sort of knows everything about your career and can control it. But I'm not sure why, if they weren't involved in it, they wouldn't be horrible in other ways, or what they would do. So could you explain that kind of fact?
I think it's when you care about something so much as a career, because kids probably do this because they have some interest in film. They probably like the film and all that. When the parent has control of something that that thing that they value so much, I think it's likely to be worse. I think again, the parents now have a greater incentive to be addicted to you, because there is a financial loss that they're putting onto it. It's now that the parent has a greater incentive. Like like, yeah, I could be a dick about you being football practice, but if you're not aiming to be like produce anything about football practice, I don't know how that is emotionally exploitative, especially when opposition tells me that there is a lot of avenues that you can be exploited. I think it just means that a parent having the full more unobjective thing about your career is probably more effective for you in the long term, because you now mutually exclusive have a parent. What I think what at the end of the speech you should buy is that on edge cases, we increase the likeliness when we oppose these parental managers that a parent can have a little bit more step back. This increases the likeliness that they won't get emotionally burdened. This increases the likeliness that when they're spending 40 hours doing something, that they don't have this conflict of interest, which means that they will make worse decisions. This again looks like the most extreme example. We can look at the most extreme examples when like Britney Spears' dad literally like controlled her whole career. I think this is what it looks like when you feel like you spent all this time, you feel entitled to it because like the more time you perceive in it, therefore your parents are more likely to want to exploit you. Bad parents can do it to a greater extent because they've like contracts over you. It's hard to be contractually screwing someone over at football practice.
I would like to thank the speaker for what was a very fine speech and call on the Deputy Leader of Opposition to conclude the top half of the debate.
All right, is everyone here okay?
Yep, all good.
Panel, this motion covers two types of parents. There are those who have a healthy attitude towards their kids and treat them well, and those who have a bad attitude towards their kids and treat them badly. The motion affects their ability to manifest each of those, but not which one of those they fundamentally are. If they're going to treat their kid well, they will do so either way. If they're going to treat them badly, they will do so either way. The motion is about extent. When OG doesn't recognize that, they're out of this debate. Let's talk about these two types of parents, right? Because in both cases, the parents want their kids to do this thing and do show business, which is why it's happening, right? And at young age, you need your parents to push you into it, to drive you to stuff in order to start this, because you're so young that you're not making this conscious choice, right? And your parents are supportive of this either way and want you to have this career either way. So what happens if the parent's going to be a piece of shit? One, they're going to be pretty successful there either way, right? Their child's perceived failures are often things that they don't need to like be there in person to understand, right? They lost out on a role. They made less money this month than last month. And they were practicing less than the last time that they had a performance upcoming. The important thing to note here are parents can be absolute assholes about things that they're not directly involved in, like high school sports, academics, debating, etc. Right? If you've ever been yelled at because you didn't make XYZ sports team even after your parents thought you would, then you'll understand this. But the reasons for this are because parents' narcissism, parents' projection of their insecurities through their children, and parents' bank accounts in terms of their children getting roles or not getting roles are impacted whether those parents are involved directly in the career or not. So they have those incentives symmetrically. If they're going to manifest those incentives by abusing their child, they will do so either way. Then on this note about managers, a key thing that they're going to do in terms of this is tell you to listen to your shitty manager. So if managers are the ones doing these horrible things to you, then the parents will manifest that and sort of care about your career over your well-being by telling you to just listen to the manager doing the bad things and nothing there improves. If the manager's happy with you being exploited, then note that the parents are the ones signing the exploitative contract, which makes a massive amount of OG symmetric. Because at that point, and it destroys OG, the manager is responsible for fulfilling the contract with the parents because the kid's way too young to sign it. And so under OG's mechs, the parent then controls whether or not to get rid of the manager, and therefore the impacts from OG never materialize because the parent still has ultimate control here. Another note on managers, right? They exist either way, and Callum shows exactly why. They're the ones with connections who can put you forward for way more stuff and have the time to do this as parents who are often working jobs, etc., which also washes out a lot of OG. But also, they can have very negative incentives in their own right because they want to push you to get roles for commission. The more the roles that you get, the more money that they get. The mechanism that you get given from OG of their reputation only matters if someone is there to call them out if they do something that's potentially harmful, like having a parent who's involved and understands things. The part of our case is then that the parents can deal with this, better deal with horrible managers if they're more involved. And the other thing is that other people are going to be there being awful to the child either way, and the parent can help to mitigate this. So then let's talk about what happens if you have vaguely supportive parents, right? Because I think with supportive parents, the difference is that you can try to be supportive either way, but the limiting factor is your ability. You're far more able to be supportive under our side of the house, and the parent is uniquely positioned over a good manager or anything like that because they care the most about this, right? So one, they care the most about the child, and two, they're there with the child 24/7 and to pay them way more attention than the manager ever can because they're the only client or whatever, as OG wants to put it. So then they can do two things. One, help to minimize the harm done, and two, helps kids cope with any harm that is done. I think Callum talks about both of these, right? On minimization, we tell you one, that people are more afraid to do bad shit around, bad shit to the kid when the parent's around and understands things, because they know that the parents can be rude to the kid, so they just don't want to misstep at all and don't want to put it wrong. And then because you can call stuff out better when you understand it better. So you know when to complain, you know how to complain. Your complaints are taken more seriously and make more sense because they're seen as more legitimate. And your complaints just do make more sense because you understand what those complaints need to look like. The really, really important thing here is that when the parents have been in the industry and they've seen this shit before, they understand how showbiz actually works. So if you're external, you can maybe like hear about how you're supposed to complain about things or maybe understand that something might be wrong. But we don't have that lived in-depth understanding of how showbiz actually works. You don't understand what will and won't be successful in resolving an issue because sometimes making a formal complaint isn't the right way to go about something because it just results in more bullying and more abuse, right? This is the kind of thing that you know. The second thing that we tell you is that children are better able to cope and sort of turn to their parents for emotional support. The odd push here is that children won't feel comfortable talking to their parents when they're also somewhat managerial, but note that they never make this link properly because the link that they actually end up making is that when the parent is addicted to you, when the parent pushes you too hard, you're not able to use them in a reliable way. But consider, you can be managerial whilst also being good and supportive, right? Think about talking to your debate mentor about something bad that happened to you in debating, which you can generally do if they're not an absolute dick to you, because you can be managerial, and in fact, it often puts you in a better role in order to listen to these things. And a lot of what they talk about, where you're being a dick, where you're pushing them really hard to keep working, to keep doing these things, applies either way because they can tell you just follow what your manager says regardless of anything else. What we tell you then is that you actually provide better emotional support when you understand exactly what the child is going through. They feel heard and listened to you because your response is to engage with them. Things that you're going to be saying to them are meaningful things because you have an understanding of how showbiz works. So you can tell them why they didn't get that role and things like that. And the child feels like you're saying meaningful things instead of pointless platitudes, and because they also understand this, understand that you have those experiences. So you're able to do a lot more to help your child cope with adversity and cope with hardship on our side of the house than theirs as well. And a lot of their max here are symmetric. At this point, I'll take a POI from closing.
Although the mechanisms that you are saying is that all parents have an innate need to like protect their child and help them, a lot of times parents do terrible things to their child, such as screaming at them or beating them. Why do they do that?
They do that for the reasons I've outlined, because they're narcissistic, they're projecting their insecurities through their children, and they have their own issues, or they want the money from the showbiz or whatever. The important thing is that this isn't our mech. Our mech is that when the parents have this incentive, which they often do, in those cases, the parents can better actualize this and better look after the child on op than they can on gov. It's about ability. The willingness is symmetric. But then when they have a willingness to abuse their child and to be awful to their child, which is also symmetric, so the extent to which they can be awful is symmetric, they're still able to do that to a very similar extent on both sides of the house because they control things like the contracts with the manager, and because they can also like yell at their kids even if they're not directly involved in their kid's career. OG's push is that the parents get more abusive and get more awful. We don't think it is about that. It's about how they actualize this, how they actualize their beliefs and that sort of thing. Let's weigh off a little bit. We think all groups in show business have an incentive to some extent to like abuse a child, push them to their limits, and be shitty with. They maximize the profit and performance out of someone who cannot protect themselves. Parents often have more of an incentive for like good shit as well, sometimes. So that's what Callum talks about in terms of the biological instinct, in terms of the social pressure from friends and family. So let's just weigh off the best cases here. The best case on Gov for their case to work is you get another negative force imposing on the child. But that child's really screwed over either way, whether or not there's one extra negative force piling on top of all the other negative forces that exist in show business. The best case on opposition is that you get a single positive force, right? Which makes a huge difference psychologically and amongst this like massive sea of negative forces, because you have someone knowledgeable and someone understanding in your corner, and that's a big difference to you psychologically and in their ability to stand up for you. So even if you believe that both the op and the gov cases both happen sometimes, and you don't buy any of my responses, our best case is much, much, much more meaningful than the best case on gov, because there's a big difference from going from no support to some support, whereas on gov, it's lots of abuse to lots of abuse and then maybe a bit more. This is why we win pretty clearly from OO. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for what was a very good speech and call on the member of government to open the back half of the debate.
Thank you. Can I check that you can hear me? I'll also try video in a second. I'm also okay with streaming.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Perfect. Still visible?
Yes, all
visible?
good.
Okay, perfect. If that changes, let me know. POI is in the chat, please. Look, it really doesn't matter. It matters to a lesser degree if a parent loves you. If their brain perceives that the way to manifest this love is to push you or hit you or pressure you into a result that they perceive to be better for you, they will consider that this is the correct way for them to manifest their love. I don't think OO recognizes the fact that if they think their love is better expressed by pushing you, if they become your heavily involved manager, they're very likely to be worse. Look, the majority of your OO case can be heavily mitigated by reading the motion. It says heavily involved versus not being a careless parent. So what do they have to stand behind? Both of audition benches here. One, you probably put them on diets, right? In order to ensure that they're TV appealing and to make sure that the producers will want to prioritize them and will not like fat shame them when they choose them for roles. See, for example, Ariel Winter's mom, who pushed her onto diets for half of her life in order to make sure she's appealing to Modern Family viewers. Secondly, you probably make them maintain childlike appearance to remain for as much time as possible on kids shows. See, for example, the Disney Channel or the Nickelodeon moms. For example, pushing Bella Thorne to look like a 16-year-old when she was 20-year-old because it was more likely to get her more roles into the same franchises. Thirdly, you're very likely to schedule auditions in several towns in order to make sure that they make it, even if the LA environment doesn't welcome them. You're going to try into, I don't know, New York environment as well. And note, this is not Emma Stone, right? This is not a child who is super on board and is willing to go to 30 auditions a week, but it's probably a child who has a medium level of excitement, for whom all of these things do get overbearing after a point. What can we stand behind on Gov, I think? For example, not being a careless parent, right? Drafting good contracts for your child, asking the child, how is your audition, right? Or encourage them if they're on board with this. But the analogy, if you want, is parents that ask you about your grades and admonish you if you get an F, but not push you to have straight A's, right? I think this is the kind of binarity you're talking about. I think OG blind spot is that there is no clear framing of how a normal parent would interact with this, because they say on both speeches, look at the most extreme examples. What our extension does is quite simple. It directly engages with OO, they'll abuse anyway. Our extension proves that no matter if they're good parents or bad parents or how much they love you, being involved in the industry, heavily involved, structurally makes them deprioritize the child and structurally makes them make bad decisions for you. A few things here. One, what does specifically exposure bring to you as a parent? You bond with the producers or you are the one communicating with them, which means that a lot of the negotiations being done on behalf of your child are mediated through your person, which means that you feel somewhat responsible or fully responsible for what you have promised the producers, for what you promised your child will be delivering, or for what you set out to do with your child. The second thing is that you're emotionally involved with the finished product, the show being pushed through, because you see it as an extension of your child, as opposed to seeing your child be an extension of your child. See the analogy of parents getting super involved, for example, in debating tournaments where they care very much about them winning, as opposed to most parents who are like, did you enjoy yourself? Great. Semi-finals, final, I don't really care because I don't know about this so much. What does this specifically bring in terms of tipping point? I don't think top half proves a tipping point. One, heavily involved, as per my previous analysis, means that your name is associated with your child, which means that any fuck up of your child or any Miley Cyrus gone rogue is associated with Billy Cyrus and associated with the guidance you have given them throughout the industry. Secondly, you yourself as a person feel the gravitational force of the industry. It's a super appealing industry. It's very luscious. It's very like flouncy was the word. It's very shiny, which means that it is very unlikely for you to be able to remove yourself and the child, because there are certain benefits that you enjoy yourself. 3, you feel that it is within reach. You see your child doing well at auditions. You see them starting to do well. So you feel like it's always so close. And the thing is that humans have an inherent tendency to reach for something that they perceive, like subjectively perceive to be close. The more you see your child doing better, the more you're likely to feel like if you push a bit more and a bit more, they will reach the thing things, so you aren't going to let go because you think they're so close. Fourthly, you get a network with the other parents. There is an inherent competitivity bred exclusively when you get heavily involved. But fifthly, and I think quite crucially, economic interest and networking. You're very likely to project your own interest. Probably you as a person suffered some degree of economic hardship in your life and are trying to provide a better future for your child. This looks like, for example, you know that the money they make from show business when they're 14 gets them into uni, or allows you to pay their fee for uni without getting into debt, or allows you to pay their health insurance well, which means that you are aware of the kind of benefits that you as a person didn't have because you didn't have that much money. Which means that you will perceive pushing them into this as the only window into a different life for your child than the one you did have, and a time frame you need to take advantage of, which is why you are going to prioritize economic interest and the money they're likely to make. I'm happy to take O, if not CO.
Yeah, everything you say happens either way. The delta is just your parent is still starving the child, and the manager still does all this exploitation anyway. On our side, when the parent actually cares, you have somebody who's able to push and do all the loving care and support with actual
Thank you.
access.
That is a POI that doesn't listen to my speech. Please look at my mechanisms. So, what does this argument prove? One, that there is an emotional vulnerability that the parent is exclusively exposed to when she enters the industry and becomes heavily involved. And secondly, it is unlikely for the child to convince the parent to drop this when the parent has their own, benefits on the line. Why should you prioritize this? Why should you prioritize this over everything else? One, because it is irrespective of whether or not you're a good or a bad parent, or of the amount of love you have for your child. Secondly, because it specifically explains why exposure to the industry generates the tipping point, that it unlocks the OG benefits. And thirdly, because it accounts for the emotional proximity OO seems to rely on. The emotional proximity makes you more likely to tap into the emotional vulnerabilities that make you deprioritize your child and prioritize the economic interests or the fame interests you believe are in their best interests. CG.
Okay, I would like to thank the speaker for the very fine speech and call on the member of opposition to continue the case for their side, I guess. Here.
Hi, am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'll take at least one from opening government. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Marina just messaged me something interesting, which is that most people grow up to be adults if they don't die before that. And I think that means that a lot of opening opposition's responses to both the government arguments are a bit insufficient, because it's true that it's probably somewhat symmetric when you're younger, but once you grow older, obviously it matters if your parent is your manager or someone else. And OG does have explanations for why you won't fire them because of those emotional reasons, so I don't think they're technically addressing a big part of the debate. First thing I'm going to do is give some important clinical rebuttals to GovBench, then my extension. So on opening government, their first claim is about how parents are likely to have bad incentives, about money and so on. The issue with this claim is that this assumes that on our side, the parent who is involved is like a tiger parent who doesn't care about the child, while on their side, they're a caring parent who cares about like you and your life, which means they have one of two burdens. The first burden is to prove that entering show business makes them into a really bad person, something that I think CG does, but OG doesn't explicitly do, because their DPM explanation is this idea that actually your relationship will get worse because you as a parent will start caring a lot about their money and then make bad decisions for them, which doesn't explain why other managers wouldn't call them out, or why the child wouldn't call them out, or why there's no way to stop them, which are all responses that have been destroyed by opening opposition. But the second possibility is that they stay out of this career completely, so the child is independent, and hence you're free from your abusive parents. The response to this that's important is, if your parents are abusive or like bad, then they can make you feel really, really bad as a person outside of your career, which is really bad because no one sees what they're doing. While if they do it within the industry, other people can call them out and tell you about the behaviors that they're doing against you. So abuse only happens at home on their side, which means it's impossible to check. On our side, if it happens in both instances, you have people checking whether this might be legal. So there's more people who can either call CPS or at the very least recommend a therapist, or they explicitly condemn your career, because if they're not heavily involved and their career is like taking away from from their power to control you as a child, they'll start shitting on you for the things you do so that you come running back to them, which is probably even worse because now you've lost all your capacity to escape. But on our side, I think the implication is obvious. It's easier for you to keep moving forward, being having more agency because people criticize them. The second really important rebuttal is to closing government, because their claim is that parents get emotionally involved and start making bad decisions. The first response to this is that the children are also emotionally involved in the sense that they also feel responsible for the contracts and they also feel responsible and emotionally involved in the shows they're in. So they want to complete it anyway. So I'm not sure why the manager would flip this. But second of all, why would a manager do this opposite, which OO also pointed out, which is that the manager earns money on you completing your contract. So presumably they also want you to finish. Now, what is a CO extension? Why is it that parents are likely to listen to their children and have a really good relationship with them on our side, and the impacts of that are their career is safer and they have a better relationship with their parents? OO does one part of this, explaining why parents understand the showbiz language. We're going to explain to you what the details of showbiz are, why they're a threat in the first place, and why parents need to protect you. And second, why it's more than just knowing about showbiz, but understanding your goals and relating to them. And then we're going to weigh the importance of this relationship. First of all, what kind of parents are going to be involved? Two important pieces of framing. They're kind of liberal and respect your talent because they let you go into show business in the first place. So to some extent, they need to either like show business or respect you and your talent for it, and they want you to succeed. But second of all, note that even though like they're parents who don't know anything, they're going to come in with a learning mindset because they don't understand what's going on. They need to learn as much as possible. They need to learn who they can trust, and they need to understand the industry because if they want you to succeed, they need to know as much as possible. So three important points of this. First of all, they're going to be skeptical in a way that no one else is, because they're going to be an independent outside source that checks around to check if your agent and your manager and your makeup artist are trustworthy, and they're going to notice the way you're treated from a first person perspective by being there. So if someone is treating you in a way that maybe doesn't listen to your voice's concerns, or for example is effectively shutting down your ideas because they're pushing through what they want, it's difficult for you to notice as an individual in the industry because you feel always that you're at the disadvantage and you don't know what the other person is talking about because you have less expertise, and also often you're younger, so you just trust people you look up to. But your parents are outsiders who know about you, and so when they're involved in these discussions, they care about you the most, as opening opposition points out, and hence want to protect you. But second of all, it's also important that the relationship to you gives you a lot of agency, right? This is important. Yes, they might be slightly patronizing and think they know more about you, and yeah, that's true in the sense that they might also find other adults they trust and don't trust. But the difference is, first of all, you will talk to them in a way that's more comfortable than your manager. You'll be more honest to them because you've been with your relationship with your parents for a while. You can tell them the things you're scared about, but you also can't overrule their voices. You can't just say, shut the fuck up, manager, I don't care what you think, I'm going to do something else, because you can't just get rid of your mom. You desperately care about the relationship, and so does your parent, who doesn't want to be replaced by another manager, because heavily involved doesn't mean that you automatically stay forever. If OG is correct and there's an emotional connection, then CG is also correct, which is that it's volatile, and hence the child might eventually realize the parent is not good for them and replace them, which they can do especially as they get older and get more independence, which means there's always an incentive for parents to keep a good relationship with you. But more importantly, you have an incentive to respect them and listen to them in a way you don't to managers. Third of all, I'm going to start talking about the impacts of this and why they're important and start weighing within them. Before that, opening government quickly.
Managers have a lot of clients. They're much less likely to be emotionally exploitative because they don't care about you specifically. Even with the best intentions.
Wait. I'm sorry. So they have lots of clients, so they don't exploit their clients, but they can just go to the other client. Like, presumably, if you have multiple clients, it is easier for you to get away with screwing up a relationship, which, by the way, OO already said this. Like, your POIs don't even beat the top half. Okay, so the impacts. First of all, on your career, second of all, on your relationship. Let's start with the relationship. Why is it important for you to spend time with your parents, and why will it not happen on the counterfactual? Something OO doesn't explain. The first thing is your career and your job requires you to spend a lot of time in the industry, but often if your parents aren't involved in that industry, then they also have jobs, which they have to spend a lot of time in and other relationships to maintain. So they can't always be with you on your tour. But second, even if they are on the tour with you, if they don't understand what's going on, then you won't want to spend time with them because you can't talk to them about the nuances without explaining the entire context, which you also don't have time for. But why do parents matter uniquely? First of all, they know about you in a way that no one else does. They know your patterns from childhood, right? No one else can know what you did when you were a child. No one else can know the type of ways you respond to people as your parents because they know you at home. They know you every day, all day. But second of all, they need to feel like they can understand your choices, and hence they're going to help you with your doubts, right? Like when you have concerns about what you're going to do in the future, now that they know more about the show business, they can try to give you advice on it and make you feel more validated. But third of all, they need to fix their biases. They might be scared of the industry and think that there's too many people partying, and they might have bad ideas if they're not involved in it. Now that they know more, they're more likely to have a good relationship with you. So weighing this and your career, first of all, it's likely that they now have the time to help you because they're necessarily there in the moment of the decision. And before you make dumb, impulsive decisions, they can help give you advice. But second, they're certainly trustworthy. You know your parents care about you, so there's not a fear that they might be like trying to manipulate you. But third of all, the relationship is the most validation you'll ever get. Even when you fail, even when you succeed, they will always make you feel like you're doing the right thing and be there for you because they understand what's happening. This can only happen when they know the decisions you've made. And on that, I think CEO should win this debate.
I would like to thank the speaker for the very good speech and call on the government whip to conclude the case for their side.
Sorry, I was fine with being streamed. I guess I forgot to consent, but if you did stream me, it was fine.
I forgot streaming was an option, so yeah, I guess I consent. Not very enthusiastic, but you know. The single response that CEO gave to our case was that children also feel responsible for the contract. I know Marina is going to like actively respond to our case in whip, but I want to point out that realistically, there isn't a lot of pushback from any opposition side. Also, the POIs that were asked in the member also didn't help the opposition bench. So let's take this down and then I'm going to interact with CEO. I feel kind of uncomfortable having to repeat Anna's speech, but the point was that, yes, you kind of have to oblige by the contract, but that's not really the point. The point is whether or not the parent is still has active interest to protect you, or they conflate that interest to protect you with the interest to protect your career, whether these interests are diametrically opposed or whether they can be diametrically opposed. What does this do? It shows you that the response doesn't really answer to our case, because our case, to summarize it very simply, is it's more likely that the parents turn out badly because of entering this business. So that breaks the deadlock on top half of what is the fair characterization of parents. Are they tiger parents that are super horrible and abusive to their children? Are they like really nice and they are actually going to stand up to the managers? We don't care, because both of those scenarios are more likely to play out in our favor when the parent is there to ensure solely the protection of the child and have none of the managerial positions that were done earlier. Now, the other thing that CEO responded is like, it's okay if the parent is there and they can abuse their child in front of other people because we call child protective services. Like, okay, thanks. But I think that if you show that you are more likely to do that, if you are part of the industry, it's significantly more likely that the kind of producers who enjoy this because they know they can now take advantage of the child are going to jump onto it. So that flips their response and shows you that these parents that are terrible for the child are more likely to be rewarded within the industry, thus getting to do this to their child more at a larger extent and empowering more predatory behavior onto their child, something that CEO needs to respond to. So what is the CEO case? It's essentially boiled down to two things. One, parents learn and they check around the industry to see if their child is safe. And secondly, they get to spend time with their child. Let's take the first point. I think that all parents, regardless of how involved they are, at the beginning stages, are going to go around and ask and see what's going on with their child. They're not just going to throw them into the hands of the wolves. Importantly here, I think that you are more likely to get out early if you feel like your child is in danger, especially if you don't have aspirations for that child to become a really famous star. So that is symmetrical. The main point of CEO doesn't actually do anything for the debate, but I want to actively flip this because I want to note here that you are more likely to remain longer in the industry if you are the bad parent. What does this mean? It means that the parents who did check around, as CEO says, and continue to be in the industry are more likely to be bad parents, thus more likely to accrue the detriments that we're talking about on our side of the house, thus showing you why there's more marginality on government rather than opposition side. The second thing they say is that you're more likely to spend time with your parent. And this is really weird. One, I know that just spending time with people can be fun, but realistically, this isn't like quality, wholesome time with your child because most of the time you're going to talk about their job. Moreover, I think that this also spills into the child's ability to disconnect from their job, because then their parent, by being their manager, one, emotionally, they don't feel like this is the secure place where they're just eating ice cream, because a conversation about how they should be losing fat can come up at any moment. But also secondarily, I think that more realistically than the CO case is that you are going to advise your child. The parent is still there to do their job. This isn't the point of the debate. The question is whether the parent can adequately do this or not. CO is clearly out of the debate. I can take OO.
So the point that you've missed from OO is that if you're a narcissist who manifests love through abuse, then you will abuse the child on both sides, even if you're making
Okay,
both
I don't want to
service. But
interrupt
if
with
you're
this
good,
point, because realistically, it's really bad. We can't just characterize parents as bad or good, and that's the spectrum that you have to play on. Parents, like all humans, are complex individuals who have incentives that are conflicting, and the reason why that's important is because it shows to you that great parents sometimes scream at their children. Great parents sometimes force their children into something that they didn't want to do, and they do that because they think that they know better than the child, because the emotional proximity that they have to their child is uncomparative to the emotional proximity that they have to poverty, for example. So I think that they're more likely to push their children into things just because they think this will save my child long term. So this breaks your argument about like bad parents and good parents. This was already responded in my member, by the way. So let's interact with OO very quickly. Firstly, they talk about professional managers existing anyway. I think that this is used to watch the debate, but realistically, I want you to try to imagine what can parents do if a manager is present on either side of the house. On our side, what they do is that they talk to their child when they come home from practice or like theater or whatever they're doing, and that's about it. Maybe they discuss if something bad has happened to the child, and maybe they try to help them emotionally process. But on their side, the parent needs to feel useful because they want to be actively involved into that child's life. So what are they likely to do? They're more likely to do the kinds of things that managers are not allowed to do by contract, such as deciding what the child is going to eat, how the child is going to look like, and whether the girl is going to remain 16 for the next 12 years of her life. This is important because it shows to you that parents now have the ability and the incentive to inflict much more damage onto the child. Now, let's get into the comparative of OO, of whether producers or managers are more likely to abuse the child than the parent. Let's take the best case scenario. If this is true, one, the child might conflate the parent's interest on their side of the house. So regardless of whether the parent is good or not, the fact that the parent is so involved into this might make the child believe that in order to satisfy the parent, they need to satisfy the contracts, thus less likely to talk about their abuse and less likely to do any of the things that OO wants them to do. Secondly, it's easier to rationalize to parent, especially as the child gets older. It's easier for a manager to say to the parent, this is what show business looks like. You need to do this for your child's benefit. The parent is likely to feel guilt tripped by this and does not have the same emotional reaction that the child has because the harm isn't inflicted directed on them. What is the upshot of this? That the parent's ability to protect might be shaky. So it is increased not through the information that they have by being there all of the time, but rather by the distance that they have, because they then can signal when things are going wrong without having incentives to push things in one way or another. This solves the deadlock of are they good, are they bad? We don't realistically care. As long as they are able to have an emotional distance from this and ensure the child's interest rather than their career, we think that this is great for the child. Let's also show you why we take over OO. Because they say that parents conflate interests, but they never explain why the career is more important than the child. Thus, their case is limited to bad parents. Ours isn't because of the mechanization I told you about earlier. Secondarily, we show you why bad parents can get worse, and this takes us over OG as well. Clear win for CG.
I would like to thank the speaker for the very fine speech and call on the opposition whip to close the case for their side and debate as a whole.
All right, I consent to being streamed, recorded, whatever. One moment. Okay. Three, two, one. I'm first going to go into some answers to CG, rebuttal, and then impacting and weighing our case, because I think there's quite a bit to do. But before all of that, I want to point out that throughout the whole debate, when you judge it, I think you have to actually judge it from what team actually provides the best solution to either characterization of each team. Meaning, when OG and OO and CG talk about predatory parents or tiger parents, and then also talk about like average parents, you need to understand that one, tiger parents are oftentimes very rare in number, meaning that most parents are probably most average because there's still like a trend and norm to be somewhat caring about your kid. There's more and more wokeness about it, like laws, like in the Balkans, it's becoming more and more it's becoming less popular to beat your child because slowly like the Western like ideals of maybe there's other ways to like educate your child, etc., are coming over. And especially in the areas where like showbiz is extremely strong, this is true, like which is the US and Hollywood, which is known to be super liberal, which is known to be woke. They're literally right now on strike because they have a strong union, which is a very leftist thing to have. So I want to notice that like from the get-go, this means the framing that most parents are going to be mid or average is probably the strongest one. Meaning that when you weigh, you have to weigh like the worst case that might happen in some instances on their side of the house versus one, the majority of cases that Shaurya characterizes to you, but secondly also that in the worst cases, you're probably better off on our side. So now into what does Valeriu respond to our case? They basically say predatory behavior is being rewarded in showbiz, thus parents will learn to do that. I think one, Shaurya gives you quite a lot of characterization on why parents know you from a very young age, why they know like when you cry, like that you're sad, that they know like when you pooped yourself the first time, etc., etc., and they stay behind, like next to you. Meaning it's unclear why, just for money or just for fame or just because they want to push your career or something, they will suddenly now do the things that will like be bad for you. But I think that even if you believe that, I want to weigh something important, which is our impact that we bring, is that the validation from parents is really important. And know that validation from parents is an impact and sets on both sides, because even if your parents are bad, you still crave their validation. You still want to be understood. They're like, this is the being that created you, that brought you to this earth. But not only that, you grew up with dad and mom being right. They were making choices for you your whole life, meaning that you need to believe that they're correct, because otherwise your whole life was literally crap, meaning that you want to believe this. And usually they actually want to protect you in your own ways. And CG concedes that even if the ways are sometimes very bad, they want to do that. Even as you go through puberty, usually what you crave most, or the like moments that you value the most, are the moments where you actually reconnect with your parent and do the things that you used to love, because this is the moments where you feel so close to them and so close to the one thing that is like the resemblance of your creator, your God on earth, which is your parents. Meaning, the acknowledgement and the validation from your parents and them saying to you, I understand you, or I understand what you're going through, or I understand the choice you made, is something that you will be craving on either side of the house. The difference here is, even if you have a mom that like believes that like dieting is good or something, the problem is on their side of the house that you lose the validation from your parents if you decide to like not diet, or to diet depending on what they believe is the right thing, because they don't understand, or they are not there with you in that moment understanding how the decision came to be. Meaning that when you have a parent that wants you to diet but you choose not to diet, and you go and you talk to your parent and you tell them, oh, I chose to not diet, they're going to be mad at you and want you to like diet in the first place if that's like what should have happened, meaning that they're going to disvalidate the choice that you made, but they're also not going to understand why you made the choice to begin with. Meaning that on our side of the house, they might understand, or they might think that dieting is good for showbiz, but they will be in the room with you and they will understand how the choice came to be. So if you come to them and tell them, Mom, I really don't want to diet for showbiz, they're going to validate your feelings by saying like, I understand, but it's really important for all of these reasons, because showbiz works this way, or because, you know, your manager who has really good contacts needs you to do this, etc. Meaning that it's probably more likely that you're going to feel understood by them. Before I continue, OG.
As proven in the PM, the conflicting parent-manager interest and level of investment corrupts the parental relationship and enforces complete coercion over the child. This is so much worse than when you have an
I don't understand why that would happen. Like, why would you give up your child that you like care about, that you've born, that you've brought into this earth, just because a manager comes in and is like, I want you to 12-year-old naked or something like that. Like, why would that be the case? I think this is very assertive. Then what they tell us also is like spending time with your parent is bad because you can't like disconnect from work. I think like if you're in showbiz, usually what you do is like you travel a lot, you go to parties, you oftentimes don't just stop working, you usually like in those circles. And I think that actually parents are somewhat of like a safe haven within them, because probably from all your friends and from all your surroundings in showbiz, they're probably the purest form of a safe like refuge, because they remind you of the times when you were still a kid, because they're the ones when you cry that will still hug you, etc. Maybe not all parents, but most parents surely will. I think when it comes to weighing, it's important to understand that there's probably going to be like two variations of this relationship with parents. First is the tiger parents, and we think it's better to have them around because of one important thing. Note that you grow up to be an adult. And I think Shaurya's characterization of that parents come from an outside world and probably going to scrutinize this a lot more is important here. What does that mean? This means if you have your parents around and they're making really bad decisions for you, and then you grow up to be an adult and managers keep pointing out like, look, this might be shady, or I can make you feel better, etc., you're not going to have any regret cutting them out of your life because they were literally there. If they weren't there the whole time, what they usually are better at doing is gaslighting you into saying, no, this was this way, or why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do that? Meaning, if they're there, you also rationalize to yourself it's easier to cut them out. But secondly, if they're average parents, I think you have someone around you who actually understands you, not just like because and doesn't just know showbiz, but actually cares about you and actually gives you the validation that you seek at the end of the day. Note, otherwise, you don't just go home, they're not around. So I think we proved that you get validation from parents, which is the most important thing. CO.
I would like to thank the speaker for the very fine speech, and I would like to thank everyone for the very interesting debate. Now I would like to ask you guys to leave the room, and we will educate and call you back.
It's my
Thank you.